Hello again, fourth graders, and welcome back to Unit 4 Math Workshop. Today we're going to continue our conversation about Unit 4 by examining making reasonable product estimates. So there's a lot of things we already know about this sentence, but there's a lot of things that I want to point out to you. So we already know from some of our previous units that one part of the things that we have to do as mathematicians is sometimes look at numbers and make estimates. Now remember that the way that we do that is by using tools for estimation, like rounding. So this time we're going to use what we already know about estimating, rounding, but instead of using addition and subtraction only to make those estimations, today we're going to use multiplication. Now that doesn't mean that we don't still have to do some addition or subtraction within our sentences. Many of these problems are going to be multi-digit, which means the numbers are going to be big, and it also means multi-operation, where we're going to have to use at least some multiplication to solve the problem, but it doesn't mean we won't see any addition or subtraction. We just want to use reasonable product estimates. That means that we're going to be trying to figure out the most appropriate product or answer to a multiplication problem. So let's start by doing an example together. I'm going to talk our way through this. So it is going to be slow going, and we are going to be taking lots of notes. So I'm going to let you know ahead of time that for these kinds of problems, you're probably going to want a highlighter or two, or colored pencils where you have different colors. And you're probably going to want a lot of extra paper so that you can take lots of notes and do all of your math on a separate sheet of paper so that you don't have to squeeze it all into your journal. And the directions on this one say it is okay to use a calculator. I would like you to try the work on your own to practice your own multiplication skills, but you can check your work with a calculator, of course. So I'm going to actually pull one straight out of your journal, and we're going to try this one together today before you go off and try this work on your own. So the directions tell us to write an estimate and show your thinking. So remember what we've talked about all this year, that as a mathematician, not only do you need to choose the correct operations, but we want to know why. What clues in the story were there that gave you the reason to use that particular operation? It says we can use a calculator to solve the problem and check that our answer is reasonable based on our estimate. So we've done this work before, right? Where we made an estimation, we used rounding to round the numbers off to make them easier and more friendly, and then we found out what the answer should be approximately. Then we did the real problem with the real numbers, and we compared the answers that we got from our estimation and compared to the real answers when we use the real numbers. And if we've done our work properly and we've used all of the skills really well, the answers that we've got for both should be pretty darn close to each other. So let's give this one a shot. I used more than one color highlighter just so I could keep track of the two things that this problem is asking me about. I think it's important that I do that just to keep track. And I'm also going to look for, of course, those read, draw, write tools, right? So we read the problem first, and then we go back and look again at all of those clue words and what the problem is really asking us for. And then we draw some problems out to see how we can do it, and then we solve. So this question says, a housefly beats its wings about 190 times per second. A wasp can beat its wings about 400 times per second. About how many more times does a wasp beat its wings in 1 minute compared to a housefly? So we're talking about houseflies and wasps. We're going to compare how fast they can beat their wings. I did notice that this question gave us a little bit of a trick. Did you notice it? In the problem, it talks about how fast the beats are per second, but then the question is asking us how many more times a wasp beats its wing in 1 minute. So, oh my gosh, not only are we going to be doing some conversion work, converting seconds into minutes, we're also going to be using multiplication because these are product estimates. And we're going to have to use some rounding skills. Then I went back and I noticed the question says, how many more times does a wasp beat its wings compared to, that means more than, a housefly. So when I hear more than, I know that this problem is also going to require subtraction. More than means that one is going to be bigger and one is going to be smaller. So I know we're going to use multiplication. I know we're going to do conversions, rounding, and now it looks like we're going to be doing some subtraction as well. So do you see how these problems not only become more complicated because the numbers get bigger, right? These are big 3-digit numbers, but they're also multi-operational. We're using multiplication and it looks like some subtraction. So we've got to be prepared to set out to do this work, and it's probably going to take a lot of steps. So the first thing I want to do is just write some notes. I want to keep track that a housefly beats its wings something per second. I'm going to have to do some rounding here in a second. And the wasp is going to beat its wings so many times per second. And I also need to remember that to go from seconds to minutes, I need to do some work. And I remember that when I did that, I had to multiply by 60. So let's start. What's a reasonable number that I can round 190 to in order to make a good estimate? I can use front end estimation, where I just look at the first number and call it 100. But 190 is awfully different from 100. So I don't think that's a really good way to estimate, because that means I would be off by at least 90, and that's not going to get me close to the answer. I could do rounding to the nearest 10 or rounding to the nearest 100. And rounding is very similar to using that close to estimation strategy. They tend to be very similar. So I think I'm going to go with rounding. We remember from our last unit on estimation that rounding is the best, most reliable way to do estimation. So I'm going to round this to 200. It's really close. It's the next 100 up. It's only 10 away. So I'm going to call it 200 beats per second for the housefly. Now, the wasp has a nice round number already, 400. It's a very friendly number, and I won't need to do any rounding, so I can go ahead and leave that alone. So I know I can do these two numbers for my rounding and my estimation, but now we need to do that work of how are we going to find the estimate? Now, remember, we have to do not just per second, we have to do in 1 minute. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to multiply. Well, if the housefly does 200 beats per second and there are 60 seconds in 1 minute, I'm going to multiply 200 times 60. And that will give me the answer that I need for the housefly. So let's do that. Housefly, 200 times 60. And I remember from yesterday, I can focus on my basic fact, 12. And I see 1, 2, 3 zeros. Okay, that looks good. Now let's do the wasp. He beats his wings 400 times per second, and there are 60 seconds in 1 minute. So I can do 400 times 60 for the wasp. And I'm going to use what I remember about yesterday. 4 times 6 is 24. And there are 1, 2, 3 zeros. Okay. So now I know housefly. And I know wasp. I know how many beats that they're going to beat their wings in about 1 minute. But there was more to that problem, remember? I know from my story that the wasp beats its wings more, and the question wants to know how many more beats does the wasp make than the housefly. So I'm going to look for the number representing the wasp, 24,000. And I'm going to have to do some subtraction because that one's bigger than the housefly, and the housefly was 12,000. So if I do that subtraction, my zeros aren't going to change, but 24 minus 12 is 12. So my estimation, I estimate that the wasp will beat its wings about 12,000 times more per minute than the housefly. Now we need to use the real numbers to find out the real answer. And then we're going to see, is our real answer comparable to or reasonable compared to our estimate? So now we need to go back to our real numbers. So instead of 200, now we're going to do 190. This is for the housefly. And we still have to do that conversion work because there are still 60 seconds in 1 minute. So instead of rounding to 200, we're going to leave it at 190, but still multiply by 60. Now remember, this is when it's okay for you to do your checking on the calculator. You're just going to remember what you know already about the basic fact, 19 times 6. And I know that 19 times 6 is 114. And now I need to count those zeros, 2 zeros. So the answer that I'm getting for the housefly's beats per second is 11,400. Now let's try this work for the wasp. Now remember, actually, the wasp, we didn't even round any of his numbers. Remember, 400 was already a really reasonable estimate. So we can say that we don't even need to do any more math to find the wasp because we didn't have to round at all. 400 was the original number straight out of the problem. So we can keep that number that we found, 24,000, for the wasp. And if you aren't sure what I'm talking about, we're still just saying 400, we didn't have to do any rounding, remember, times 60, that was how we found 4 times 6 is 24, and there were 3 zeros. So our estimation and the real math are exactly the same because we didn't have to round 400. It was already a nice friendly number. So now I have my two pieces of information. I have my housefly and I have my wasp. But remember, there's one more step. That's more than. So I know that the wasp is bigger than the housefly. The number of beats per minute is bigger in the wasp than it is for the housefly. So I have to do that subtraction work now. So I know that the wasp is bigger. So I'm going to start with that bigger number, 24,000. And I'm going to subtract the smaller number, housefly, 11,400. I'm going to do my subtraction and find my answer. So 0 minus 0 is 0. Same thing here, 0 minus 0 is 0. Oh, we have to do some borrowing. If I only have 0 and I need to take away 4, that won't work. So I have to go next door and borrow. That turns into a 3, and now this one becomes 10 because I'm loaning it 10. Now I can do my subtraction. 10 take away 4 is 6. 3, my new digit after borrowing. 3 times minus 1 is 2, and 2 minus 1 is 1. So my real answer of how many beats per minute more the wasp makes is 12,600. So now we need to look at our math and we need to say to ourselves, is our real answer reasonable compared to the estimate? The answer is yes. How do I know? I know because, and of course we're going to repeat the answer, and we're going to repeat the question in our answer because we're fourth graders. I know because my estimate is close to the real answer. We're only 600 away. Our estimation was 12,000 and our real answer was 12,600. That's awfully darn close. So we know that our estimation work was correct and we know that our answer is reasonable. How do we know? Because the estimation that we made is close to the real answer that we got. So for fourth graders, I know that this is tricky work. It really requires doing a lot of steps. First, you have to read the problem 2 times. First, just to get all the information out of the story. And second, you have to go back and highlight to find the numbers that you'll need. And you will highlight for the clue words that the problem will hold that tells you the operations that you need to do. Then you might have to do more than one operation like we did. First, we had to do multiplication. Then we had to do some subtraction. And then after you make the estimation, you got to do all that work again with the real numbers. So this is going to take time. You have to give yourself lots of time, lots of grace, lots of patience, and persevere through these problems because they do take some time. And they also require a lot of scratch paper. So you're going to want to have all of your tools with you. You might want colored pencils so that you can do like me and make sure that you label each animal or each set of numbers a different color to keep track. That always helps me. You might also want to highlight, just like I did in the question, the 2 different pieces of information to keep track. So you've got to find out what works best for you. Just remember that today's work is going to require multi-digit numbers and multi-operation. So you're going to have to give yourself some time to do these problems really well. So as you go forward today, remember to keep track of using all of the steps that you'll need to do. If it requires addition and subtraction, you're going to have to do that as well. And also don't forget what we learned about yesterday about taking the basic facts and adding the number of zeros for multiples of 10. It will make today's work so much easier if you keep that in the back of your mind. All right, fourth graders, as always, if you need to do some more examples with me, I'm always happy to help you out. Just hit me up in the chat and we'll get together in a breakout room. Other than that, off you go. Good luck, fourth graders, making reasonable product estimates.